My name is Earl Buchanan, and at 45 years old, I was living a pretty ordinary life in Harmony Creek, Ohio. I worked as an accountant, a job that was about as exciting as watching paint dry, but it paid the bills. My house was a modest two-story on a quiet street, or at least it was supposed to be quiet. That's where the problem started. Harmony Creek was a place where everyone knew everyone, and most people respected each other, or at least pretended to. But a few houses up the street lived a guy who clearly didn't care about anyone but himself. He owned a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and this wasn't just any Harley. It was one of those ridiculously loud ones with straight pipes, making it sound like a jet engine on wheels. And this guy, let's call him Bob, had a habit of firing it up in the middle of the night. I'm talking 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whenever the mood struck him. He'd rev that engine until the whole neighborhood vibrated, then he'd take off full throttle like he was trying to break the sound barrier. The noise would shatter the peaceful silence of the night, and I'd lie in bed, seething with anger. He'd roar out of the neighborhood onto Main Street and disappear, only to return an hour or so later, doing the same thing in reverse. I never knew where he was going at that ungodly hour. Maybe he was buying or selling drugs, maybe he had a secret biker gang meeting, or maybe he just enjoyed disturbing the peace. Whatever the reason, it was incredibly selfish and inconsiderate. It wasn't just me. I know he woke up dozens, maybe hundreds of people each time. You could hear that bike from a mile away. It would be the only sound happening in the middle of the night. What really made it infuriating was that a police officer lived just up the street, nearly across from Bob. You'd think he would do something about it, but he never did. Maybe he was a heavy sleeper, or maybe he just didn't want to get involved. Harmony Creek had noise ordinances, but they didn't seem to apply to everyone. This went on for over a year, maybe even 2. Every few weeks, the peace of the night would be ripped apart by the sound of Bob's Harley. I'd try to ignore it, tell myself it was just a one-time thing, but it always happened again. I started losing sleep, my work suffered, and I became increasingly irritable. My life was being disrupted by this inconsiderate jerk, and I felt powerless to do anything about it. I started fantasizing about ways to get revenge. Crazy thoughts would run through my head, putting a cable across the road, throwing a brick through his window, or maybe even slashing his tires. But I knew those ideas were too risky. I didn't want to get arrested or cause any real harm. I just wanted him to stop. So I started brainstorming more subtle, less dangerous ideas. I wanted something that would send a clear message without putting me in legal trouble. One day, while working in the garage, I spotted a box of roofing nails. That's when the idea struck me. I waited for the next time Bob disturbed the peace. When he finally roared off into the night, waking me and half the neighborhood, I knew it was time to act. The next morning, on my way to work, I drove past Bob's house. His Harley was parked in the driveway, gleaming in the morning sun. I slowed down, reached out the window, and tossed a handful of roofing nails onto his driveway, right in front of his bike. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough. I imagined him getting a flat tire, realizing someone was messing with him, and finally getting the message to stop his late-night joyrides. I felt a small sense of satisfaction as I drove away, thinking I had finally taken some control back. But my satisfaction was short-lived. Less than a week later, Bob was at it again. The roar of his Harley filled the night, mocking my efforts. I was furious. My plan had failed, and now I felt even more helpless than before. The next morning, I was determined to send a stronger message. I grabbed the rest of the box of roofing nails, got in my car, and drove to Bob's house. This time, I didn't hold back. I spread the entire box of nails across his driveway, making sure there was no way he could miss them. There had to be 100 nails there. As I drove away, I felt a mix of anxiety and satisfaction. I knew I was taking a risk, but I was desperate. I hoped this would finally be enough to get Bob to stop. I didn't want to escalate things any further, but I was running out of ideas. Days turned into weeks, and I waited, holding my breath for the next late-night Harley ride. To my surprise, it never came. The nights remained quiet, and I started to relax, thinking that maybe, just maybe, my plan had worked. Then one afternoon, a few weeks after the roofing nail incident, I was working in my yard when I saw Bob walking towards me. My heart sank. I knew this confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't sure what to expect. Bob was a big guy with a scowl that could curdle milk. He stopped in front of my yard, his eyes narrowed. "You got something to say to me, Buchanan?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. I stood up straight, trying to appear calm. "Just wanted to introduce myself," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Earl, your neighbor." He stared at my hand for a moment, then reluctantly shook it. "Bob," he grunted. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something." I braced myself for an angry lecture or worse. "What's on your mind, Bob?" "My bike," he said, his voice surprisingly subdued. "I had a bunch of flat tires, cost me a fortune to get them fixed. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest, but only partially. "I might have heard something about roofing nails," I said carefully. "Seems like someone might have been upset about the noise at night." Bob looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he started to chuckle. "Yeah, well, I guess I had that coming," he said. I didn't realize how loud that thing was until my own wife started complaining. I was stunned. "So you're going to do something about it?" I asked. "Already did," he said. I traded it in for a quieter model, still a Harley, but it won't wake up the whole neighborhood when I start it. I couldn't believe it. My plan had actually worked, but not in the way I expected. I had thought I would just make his life difficult, but instead I had inadvertently convinced him to change his ways. "Well, that's great, Bob," I said, genuinely relieved. "I appreciate it." "No problem, Earl," he said, extending his hand again. "Maybe we can have a beer sometime." "I'd like that," I said, shaking his hand. Bob turned and walked back to his house, and I stood there watching him, still a little bit in shock. I had expected a confrontation, maybe even a fight, but instead I had a neighbor who was willing to listen and change. The nights in Harmony Creek became peaceful again, and I finally got some decent sleep. My work improved, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I even started to feel a little guilty about the roofing nails. A few weeks later, Bob came over with a six-pack of beer. We sat on my porch, talking about motorcycles, families, and life in Harmony Creek. I learned that he worked as a mechanic, loved to fish, and was a pretty decent guy when he wasn't revving his Harley at 3 in the morning. As we sat there, enjoying the quiet evening, I realized that my revenge plot had not only solved my problem, but had also led to an unexpected friendship. It wasn't the result I had planned for, but it was a much better one. It turns out the best revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about finding a way to understand each other and build a better community. Harmony Creek was harmonious again, and I was finally at peace. Or so I thought. A few months later, I noticed a new car parked in Bob's driveway, a sleek black sports car with a ridiculously loud exhaust. One night, around 2 in the morning, I was awakened by the sound of the engine revving. It was even louder than Bob's old Harley. I groaned and buried my head under the pillow. It seemed like the peace in Harmony Creek was destined to be short-lived. As the car roared off into the night, I couldn't help but wonder if I had created a monster. Maybe revenge, like noise, was just a cycle that never truly ended.